You get the promotion, you finish the project. Someone calls your work brilliant, and for a brief moment you feel it, the quiet satisfaction of having done something real. And then almost immediately, something else arrives. A cold, creeping thought. What if they find out? What if this was a fluke? What if the next thing I do is the one that finally reveals me for what I actually am? The strange thing is that this fear doesn't shrink as you achieve more. For many people, it grows. The higher the position, the more visible the success, the louder the internal voice that says you don't belong here, that you've somehow fooled everyone, that it's only a matter of time. This is what we might call imposter feelings, and if you've ever experienced them, you'll know they're not a small inconvenience. They can quietly hollow out the very achievements you've worked hardest for. So why does this happen? Why can success, of all things, make the fear of being exposed feel more urgent rather than less? Let's start with something that might seem counterintuitive. The fear isn't really about your competence. It's about the gap between how others see you and how you see yourself. When you succeed, that gap widens. The external image of you becomes more impressive, more admired, more fixed, and the internal experience of yourself, with all its uncertainty and doubt and private confusion, stays exactly the same. The bigger the gap, the more terrifying it becomes to imagine someone peering across it. There's a useful way to think about this. Each of us carries two versions of ourselves. There's the self that the world sees, the credentials, the achievements, the composed exterior. And then there's the self we live inside, the one that remembers every mistake, every moment of confusion, every time we didn't know the answer, and hoped no one noticed. Most people assume that everyone else's inner self matches their outer image. We look at a confident, accomplished person and assume they feel as solid as they appear, but almost no one does. The inner life is always messier, more uncertain, more human than the polished surface suggests. When you succeed, the outer image becomes harder to maintain, not because you've done anything wrong, but because the stakes feel higher. More people are watching, more is expected, and the private, uncertain self feels increasingly exposed by comparison. This is one reason why imposter feelings often intensify at moments of genuine achievement. A promotion, a public recognition, a new level of responsibility. These don't just bring opportunity, they bring visibility. And visibility, for someone who already doubts their own worth, can feel like standing under a very bright light. There's also something worth understanding about the way early experiences shape our relationship with achievement. For many people, the sense that they are fundamentally not enough was formed long before any success arrived. It may have come from a childhood in which love felt conditional, where approval had to be earned, where mistakes were met with disappointment rather than reassurance. When a child learns that their value depends on performance, they often grow into adults who achieve a great deal but never quite feel safe in what they've achieved. The success becomes evidence of effort, not of worth. And effort, unlike worth, can always run out. This is a painful pattern, and it's worth naming clearly. If you grew up feeling that you had to earn your place, in your family, in your classroom, in any room, then success may have taught you to perform rather than to be. And performing is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. You can never fully rest, because resting might mean being seen as you actually are. There's a philosophical dimension to this as well. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We don't just experience events, we interpret them, and those interpretations shape how we feel about ourselves. One of the most common interpretations that people with imposter feelings make is this: my success happened because of luck, timing, or other people's generosity. My failures, on the other hand, happened because of who I am. This asymmetry is quietly devastating. It means that nothing good can ever truly count, while everything difficult confirms the worst suspicions you already hold about yourself. This isn't a rational position, but it's an understandable one. When your sense of self-worth is fragile, you unconsciously protect it by refusing to let success touch it. If you allow yourself to believe that you genuinely earned something, then you also have to accept the possibility of genuinely losing it. And that feels too dangerous. So instead, you hold success at arm's length. You attribute it to anything other than yourself. and the fear of being exposed grows because you've never allowed yourself to actually own what you've built. Consider what this looks like in practice. Someone receives praise for a piece of work and immediately begins listing the reasons the praise is undeserved. Someone is offered a leadership role and spends the first weeks waiting to be told it was a mistake. Someone publishes something they've worked on for years and feels not pride but dread, certain that the response will eventually reveal them as a fraud. These aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of a self-protective system that was built in difficult conditions and never updated. The question, then, is not how to eliminate self-doubt entirely. Some degree of uncertainty is simply honest. It means you're paying attention, that you understand the complexity of what you're doing, that you haven't confused confidence with competence. The question is how to stop letting that doubt govern you. One practical frame that can help is this: separate the feeling from the fact. The feeling of being a fraud is real. The fact of being a fraud is a separate question entirely, and it deserves to be examined rather than assumed. When the voice says you don't deserve this, it's worth asking, what is the actual evidence? Not the emotional evidence, which is always colored by fear, but the concrete evidence. What did you do? What did it take? Who benefited from it? What would have been different if you hadn't been there? This isn't about inflating yourself. It's about being as honest about your strengths as you are about your limitations. Most people with imposter feelings are extraordinarily good at cataloging their weaknesses and extraordinarily reluctant to acknowledge their capabilities. Genuine self-knowledge requires both. It also helps to understand that being seen, truly seen, with all your uncertainty and imperfection, is not the catastrophe it feels like. The fear of exposure assumes that if people knew the real you, they would withdraw. But in most cases, the opposite is true. Authenticity tends to draw people closer, not push them away. The version of you that admits to not knowing everything, that asks questions, that acknowledges difficulty, that version is often more trusted and more respected than the polished performance you've been exhausting yourself to maintain. There's something quietly liberating in recognizing that the gap you've been so afraid of, the gap between who you appear to be and who you feel you are, is not a sign of deception. It's a sign of being human. Everyone who has ever done anything meaningful has stood in that gap. The ones who seem most assured are often simply better at tolerating the discomfort of it, not at eliminating it. You are not a fraud for doubting yourself. You are not a fraud for not having all the answers. You are not a fraud for having arrived somewhere through a combination of effort, circumstance, and the help of others. That is how almost everything worth having is built. The fear of being exposed is, in a strange way, a measure of how much you care. It means you take your work seriously. It means you understand that what you do matters. The task isn't to silence that care. It's to stop letting it convince you that you don't belong in the life you've worked to create. If this video gave you something to think about, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to explore more ideas like these, Inside the Labyrinth is here every week. Take a look at what else we've made for you. And if this spoke to a part of you that rarely gets heard, stay with that feeling for a moment. You are not broken because you feel deeply. You are only beginning to understand yourself. Subscribe to Inside the Labyrinth for more reflections on the hidden patterns of the human mind.